Hello everybody and welcome to the second webinar we have this week. And as it's a call for submissions deadline week, we have a number of speakers lined up who have previously spoken at the EuroSTAR conference. So yesterday we had Richard Egren presenting a webinar, and today we have Bob Galen, who was a tutorial speaker last year, and he will be joined by Marythorne. And today they're going to talk to you about acceptance test-driven development and behavior-driven development, the great beatdown or debate. And if you have any questions for Bob or Mary about the content of their webinar, anything they've discussed over the next hour, please just type your questions into the questions field. And you can type them at any point during the webinar. You don't have to wait till the very end. Just type them in there and we will address them at the end of the webinar. So now I'm going to hand you over to today's presenters, Bob Galen and Mary Thorn. Hello, guys.
Hi, Doug. Good morning.
Good morning, guys.
So, Doug, could you just confirm that you can see my full screen?
I can indeed, Bob. We can see
Great,
that there now.
thank you. So, hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. It's really a pleasure for us to hang out with you today. We have a lot of content, so we're going to just drive in. I'm Bob Galen, and this is just a bio slide for me. I have more experience than I care to mention sometimes, so I need to start reversing the clock and reversing my hair loss as well. And I probably met some of you at EuroSTAR, and maybe with luck I'll see you again there sometime. So thank you for coming. And then my comrade is Mary Thorn. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, guys. My name is Mary Thorn. Bob has been a mentor to me for the past 6 or 7 years, so he drags me along for these beatdown and debates that we typically have together outside of anybody else hearing us. So now you get to enjoy our banter. And so I've been in testing for about 20 years. I've been doing behavior-driven development and ATD pretty solidly for past 7 or 8. So looking forward to this webinar.
Okay, real quickly before we dive into the content, and the way this is going to work is I'm going to have my perspective. I'll share it for about 15 minutes. Then Mary will share a different perspective under the banner of ATDD and BDD. And then we'll sort of do some questions, or not so much a strong debate because we're not too abyss-aligned, but we have these two perspectives that we think you'll find valuable. And then we'll wrap things up with some questions. But before we do that, we have 3 polls that we'd like to run. If you wouldn't mind. So, Darg, if you could run the first poll.
Sure thing, Bob. So I'm just launching the first poll here now, and we're asking how many of you are actively using BDD in your day-to-day software development. So you should take a moment there just to tick the option that's applicable to you. And I can see then that there is 66% of you have taken part so far. We're up to 80, so if you haven't taken part in the poll, please do. And we'll just close it very shortly and we'll share the results with you.
So where are we, Darg?
Right now, we've got 85 or 86% people have voted, and of those, 76 people are not using BDD. So let me just close the poll here and I'll share the results with you.
That sounds great.
Now, there you can see.
Okay, so we have some new attendees. So this is going to help us, everyone. So I appreciate that response. Why don't we go to the next question?
All right.
To see where the audience is.
Now, the next poll we have here, we're asking, what have you found to be the biggest challenges of implementing BDD? Skills and/or technical challenge, team or organizational resistance, not seeing the value, consistency in applying the practice, or other. So there's plenty of options there, and if you take a moment just to tick the box that applies to you. This seems to be a bit more even across the fields here, so we're going to get as many votes in as possible, and I'll share the results with you then. We're up to 70% now, so keep them coming.
And we really appreciate this, everyone. It lets us know where the audience stands, but it also lets you know where your colleagues stand as well. So we'll get into the content in just a second.
Okay, that seems to be all the votes coming in that are going to come in.
Okay.
So I'm just going to close the poll and share the results here.
So it seems like skill set. We have some two leading candidates, and that's actually what I would have sort of expected. It's the skill set challenge and then the team or organizational resistance challenge. That's great, everyone. Thank you. And one more poll, please.
Okay, and the last poll here, we're asking how many of you agree with this statement? The most important part of a user story is the conversation. I agree or I don't agree. And the results are flying in. We're up over the 70–80% mark. So
Well, I think we made this an easier question, Doug. I think that last one, I think I was overzealous with that last question. So
yeah, this is a bit straighter to the point, so we're getting a clear outcome here. I'm just going to close the poll now and
sounds
share the
good.
results again. And there you
Oh,
have it.
wow. Okay, cool. That warms my heart, everyone. I wasn't sure where this was going to end up because there's a lot of people that don't agree. So fantastic. Thank you, Doug. Let's get into the content here.
Okay, I'm just going to close this poll and hand back to Bob.
Okay. So I just want to confirm, Doug, that I'm showing my screen, and at the top of it is Bob the Stories. Can you see that?
That's correct. We can see it there
Cool.
now.
All right, that's it going. So everyone, I'm on the clock now. Mary and I have about 15 minutes. So I want to just dive into my perspective with AT, acceptance test driven development, and behavior driven development. I don't strongly disagree with Mary. Mary and I are nicely aligned, but I think I skew slightly towards the impact of the user story and the importance of the user story over automation or over any sort of behavior-driven development or Gherkin language. I like those ways of phrasing acceptance criteria, but I think if you took away all of the automation, there's still tremendous value in the user story. So I want to just give you all a real quick user story 101. From my point of view, this is that traditional user story construct of, as a role, I want some behavior so that I realize some business value. That's the front. Very often that's called the card of the user story, or the front of the user story. Sometimes people actually have an attachment to it, and they'll put an example there. I've seen this particularly in companies where you're using user stories to reframe an application from a version 1 to a version 2. So you have a historical application, and you might put screenshots and things like that there. Ron Jeffries has this wonderful notion of the 3 C's of a user story, and it's card, conversation, and confirmation. To the right there, as you see that, as a traveler, I want to get directions between 2 points so that I can get to my destination. That would be the card part, the front part, the description part, the as a I want so that part of the user story. But that's only 1/3. You really have to look at it as that's 1/3 of the story. The second part, or the second C, is confirmation, and that's the land of acceptance criteria or acceptance tests. And in the bottom, below the card, you can see I have 5 verifies. Each one of these would be, in my terms, acceptance criteria or acceptance tests. I use the term criterion test interchangeably, and I don't get stuck on criteria or test. You can see I use verify language in this. Verify I can enter addresses in all 50 states. So as the team is implementing this story, that would become a critical sort of design thought or test thought, that we have a 50-state boundary. Quite often, folks talk about the acceptance criteria is expanding or exploring business logic or decision logic in a story, in a functionality. And then the third C And I was really, sort of happy to hear that. Is the third C is the conversation around the first two C's. So what you see before you is the front of a card. Originally, I don't know if you all know this, but the original user stories were less electronic and more 3x5 cards. So literally, card would be the front of a 3x5 card, and confirmation would be on the back of the 3x5 card, and teams would be flipping them around and talking about them, and they'd be looking at the front and scribbling things off and refining them, and they'd be scribbling things on the back. They might rip it up if it got too busy and clean it up, but they were sort of card and confirmation and having conversations around it, and they would be passing the cards around. It was a tactile feel to the card. People would be holding it up. If there was debate, you'd be shaking cards at each other in a healthy way to have that debate. That's the conversation part. One of the important parts here on this slide is that they're intentionally vague or intentionally incomplete. You're not trying, these are not traditional requirements. You're not trying to have 100% completeness. One of the reasons for that is if you did have it 100% complete, it would undermine conversation. There'd be no reason to have, if the team felt that every word, every jot, every period, every use case, every subfeature was articulated completely, well then why talk about it? Just go code it. The developers could go code it, the testers could go write test cases, and then they would meet later on. There would be no reason for teamwork or collaboration. So you want this notion of some vagueness, some incompleteness that will drive conversation during the life cycle of the story, and that includes the story going into the sprint or into execution. So hopefully you get the feeling for that. So front of the card, front is card. A few sentences. I've seen limits of 5 words. I think that's too terse. There's a couple more examples here. As a dog owner, I want to sign up for a kennel reservation over Christmas, so I get a confirmed spot. And then here, the confirmation, just another example of confirmation. And my skew in this discussion is let's not think in terms of fitness or cucumber or gherkin language. And Mary, if you don't know what that is, Mary will give a full explanation during her part of the presentation. But I'm an old-fashioned guy, and I like just very simple techniques. And the user story card is again 3x5 cards, simple language, simple cases, with an emphasis on conversation. So you can see here the richness of the confirmation in this case, the information it's giving. Verify that preferred members get 15% discount. If there's no discount service in the application, then that confirmation gives the team the information that, hey, we need to split. We might even need to split this story because we have no discount capability right now. So that's that business logic information that's coming, and the team asks questions around it and have conversations. I'll give you a quick hint. If you're having trouble splitting stories, if you're using user stories and you're having trouble splitting them and decomposing them, I would bet that you might be lightweight on your acceptance test or your acceptance criteria. If you have that struggle, invest in well-defined, in a nice set of 3 to 5 to 7 healthy, broad, functional and non-functional acceptance criteria. And I would bet that will help you, give you hints not only about how to implement it, but how to decompose it, how to split that story. And then the conversation part is what I was saying. The product owner must be available. It's a critical point for conversation across the team. This is not the tester conversation or the developers alone conversation or a BA off in the corner conversation. This is a whole team conversation. I just so happened to be coaching and facilitating a backlog refinement session yesterday with a client, and this was new for them. They were pretty new to Scrum and pretty new to backlog refinement. They had been writing stories though, but they were badly defined stories, and they really didn't have conversations. And over the course of several refinement coaching sessions, in the early stages they were incredibly quiet, but they started warming up and they started having these vibrant conversations and asking good questions. And the product owner was responding, and in some cases saying, "Oh, I don't know the answer to that. I have to go back. So this story isn't ready for prime time. We have to go back. I have to go back and get some more information for the story." But that's the kind of conversations that you want. You want surrounding the story. Again, another example of acceptance tests using this verify that terminology. So as a customer, I want to withdraw cash so that I don't have to wait in line, and then have some acceptance criteria here, or acceptances. Verify authentication works, 3 transactions, non-functional acceptance criteria, verify the overall transaction workflow takes no longer than 5 minutes. You can see how they complement one another. In fact, in that example I said yesterday, many of their stories had no acceptance criteria, and they already had estimates, but they didn't have any acceptance criteria. And I sort of forced them. I don't know if they liked it, but I sort of forced them to write acceptance criteria on the fly in the meeting with the product owner, and then re-estimate the stories, and it changed things. It changed. So writing the acceptance criteria added to the conversation. It added nuance to the conversation, to the breadth and depth of it, and it added understanding to the overall story. And obviously it affected the size of the stories, and then some of the decisions to split them down. And I had to very quickly, the team started responding on their own, and I didn't have to remind them. They immediately started picking on their own stories and writing acceptance criteria because they saw the value in it. Testing does not come from acceptance criteria, so you don't want to think of them as being test cases. I think that's a mistake that many teams make. They're business-facing. You want to think of them as business-facing criteria. They're value-focused. They're priority-focused. They help. I very often describe them as giving the team hints about where they should invest their time and effort. So from a developer point of view, they give the developers hints about design. Where should they invest in good design? Coding, functional and non-functional requirements. Where should they spend most of their time? Let's call it risk-based development. Where are the critical issues that are important to the product owner and therefore important to the customer, and spend more time there. And very often in the conversations you can get that, but you can get that by reading the acceptance criteria. Flip it around from a tester point of view. They give you wonderful information about test case development. They should give you wonderful information about risk-based testing hints. Where should you look and where should you not look? They should drive questions around that. They might even lead to further acceptance criteria to give you more hints. So their criteria, sometimes I call them mini UAT or mini U. So you can think of them as mini UAT at a story level. That's a useful sort of thought process. Hints for the job, but they're not. Their responsibility is not as quote unquote test cases, and very often teams mistake that, and so they try to create 1,000 acceptance tests, and what they're doing is actually writing test cases, and you don't want to fall into that trap. Where do they come from? Where do stories come from? They come from the product owner. They come from story writing. Very often they come from story writing workshops. Like I was saying earlier, they come from backlog refinement. Sometimes people call it grooming, but we're changing that terminology. But those are the places where stories surface. And they can surface all across those things. One mistake you don't want to make is having the assumption that they just come from the product owner. Really, it's a collaborative effort. The genesis of stories is coming from the business side, but they're also coming from the team. Very often they're coming from the team, and it's a collaborative effort to produce them. I want you to think in terms of, again, with stories and with acceptance tests, there's a really interesting sort of thinking model called the Three Amigos, and it was coined by George Dinwiddie. And the Three Amigos are the developer is one amigo, the tester or testers, so developer, developers, tester, testers, another amigo, and the third amigo is the product owner or the customer or product owners. And they swarm around the story as amigos. So you don't want the developer you don't want in backlog refinement the developer taking the story back and just coding it in a vacuum, and the tester taking it back to their desk and coding in a vacuum, and the product owner taking it back to their desk and thinking that it's done until they visit the team at the end of the sprint. There's no collaboration in that. You want those three constituencies continuously collaborating before from the genesis of the story through backlog refinement, when it enters the sprint. You want the amigos particularly collaborating when the story is being executed and delivered in the sprint, up until the point where the story is signed off by the product owner. That doesn't mean those three amigos need to sit with each other constantly, 7 by 24. It just means that I think of it as an accordion, where the individual amigos are working, but when it's appropriate, when there's a question, when there's a clarification, when they need conversation, they get together. Very often those conversations are around card, and very often those conversations are really healthily around the confirmation. I want you to all start thinking of yourselves as a member of the Three Amigos. So it takes that form of a feature team or a story owner, and like I said, it surrounds the life cycle of a story from inception to delivery and sign-off. Ken Pugh has written a book called Lean Agile Acceptance Test-Driven Development, and he talks about the Triad, and from Ken's perspective, that's just another term for the Three Amigos. So I wanted to bring that up. If you've heard about the Triad or you hear about the Amigos, they're synonymous. So the key to ATD from my point of view is it drives conversation, collaboration, and communication. That's the most important part. If you don't write a line of code, you get tremendous value out of those aspects. And automation and acceptance tests from an automation perspective are a second-level concern. So my perspective is first-level concern, good stories, second-level concern, the automation bits, the acceptance bits, and even the language you use for them it doesn't necessarily have to be complex language. But I think Mary's going to give you a different perspective. And again, to set the stage, I don't think we vastly disagree. We complement, there's a life cycle to healthy execution of stories. And Mary's going to give you a slightly different twist that I think is equally valuable. It's just not where my brain goes initially. So Mary, it's up to you.
All right. I'm on my timer now. Bob actually hit his time, which is a miracle in its own. All right. You're driving, Bob?
I'm driving, Mary.
Okay. So next slide, please. All right. So, let's just make sure everybody understands what automated acceptance tests are. In a nutshell, automated acceptance tests are executable examples that define the system specifications, okay? And if we think about what Bob was just talking about, acceptance criteria really is the definition of what we are expecting the system to do, okay? Next. So the acceptance tests are formal examples that define the requirements. They're executable, self-explanatory, readable by all team members, they test the business rules, and they're a living specification of system behavior. When people, this is automated acceptance test, and so when Bob is saying, the acceptance criteria of a story does not actually equal the test cases of what you're going to be testing, there's a fine line there. I 100% agree with what he's saying is that the acceptance criteria should be examples of how the system is supposed to behave. But I actually do think there is some testing business logic that happens in that acceptance criteria, and it tests the business rules, and they can be executable. Next slide, please. So let's make sure we understand what they're not. So they're not unit tests. They typically don't actually verify, a whole workflow or end-to-end test or regression test. They don't verify every single permutation of something. And again, they don't actually do mocking or anything like that. So when we think about acceptance criteria, acceptance tests, and automating that, this is what it is not. So the benefits that I've seen by taking the acceptance criteria and automating is that the quality is higher because everybody understands the same understanding of what we're building it. So we're building building the software right the first time. We have a regression suite that gets built up. We have a verification of doneness, meaning if you're automating in parallel while the developer is coding, you can actually be testing the system in your continuous integration, continuous deployment process, and every day checking, do I have more tests that have passed because the developer has checked in more code? And when all tests pass, acceptance tests pass that you've coded, then that's an objective form of doneness, that story is ready to be signed off from the product owner. Which and therefore creates transparency into the progress of the story. So if you're day 2 of a sprint, you've got 5 acceptance tests passing, you still have 5 that are failing, you probably have a good understanding that you're 50% through coding that story and getting it signed off on. I also like it because our manual testers become part of the automation process, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we go into behavior-driven development, as well as it allows for more exploratory testing because the happy path is automated. One of the biggest things that what happens with our testers a lot of the times is we're so worried about just making sure the buttons work or that the color of the screens are right, we don't actually get to do what we're really good at, which is doing exploratory testing and really trying to understand the system and break it in ways outside the normal way that's supposed to work. Next. So I want to just give everybody an example. When we start talking about acceptance criteria and examples and doing more around how the systems behave, I'm going to give you guys an example. So if I take this example, transactions are rounded to the nearest cent. I'm in banking, financial technology software, so this is a very common acceptance criteria for us. This one, seems fairly straightforward. So if I were to round in US dollars, the first one, people typically would say, and Bob hit enter, that the rounded value is 0.02. Makes sense. The second one would probably round up to, people would think 0.03, but in this example, it's 0.02. And for the next one, people might think that the rounded value is 0.03, but actually it's 0.02. And next slide, Bob. In this example, there was confusion, right? The goal was missing, and the goal was to create a currency conversion system for this acceptance criteria that we were doing. The example actually clarified what was meant by that acceptance criteria. And what behavior-driven development does and what acceptance test-driven development does is it actually creates those examples to help clarify the acceptance criteria in the card. It creates better conversations. And so this is where Bob and I tend to disagree about what level of acceptance criteria or examples and at what detail do we need for story acceptance criteria to be done. And in this example, transactions are always rounded down to the nearest cent is actually what the acceptance criteria should have said. Next slide. So this was a real example that's happened to me in the past company. The hacker was able to steal about $15,000, and over very seemingly minor ambiguity of the requirement, but ended up being very expensive for us, just because we didn't have an example of what exactly that acceptance criteria meant. Okay, next slide. So takeaways for this for you guys, and we're about to go into the behavior-driven development part and how this really feeds that, is the concrete examples drive consensus. Good representative examples helps everybody understand what the goal of that story is trying to do. And then for technical people to understand that goal, they have to understand the domain. And so if you're a financial technology company, the developers and testers have to actually understand how the business intends to use that function, understand that domain, because when we get into BDD and behavior-driven development, it's actually really important that the developers and testers are as invested in that domain as the product people, so that we are building the right software at the right time for the right purpose, for the right goal. So let's get into the next slide. So what does Cucumber have to do with this, or SpecFlow, or JBehave? Those are behavior-driven development tools that facilitate acceptance test-driven development. Okay, and so this says Cucumber. I've used Cucumber. I've used SpecFlow. I've used JBehave. So Cucumber is a Ruby-based and it has a Java-based version. I typically pick the behavior-driven development tool that is in the application that the application is written in. So if I have a Java backend, I typically will take Cucumber JVM. If I have a Ruby backend or a PHP backend, I probably use Cucumber. Currently where I'm at, we have a .NET backend. And so we're using SpecFlow, which it does, I feel, in my opinion, does a better job than Cucumber for .NET applications. So next slide. So Cucumber, I'm just going to go over the framework really quick just so that you understand how it works. Bob, let's go to the next slide. It's a better visual. So the way Cucumber works, and we're going to go into the process here in a minute, is Cucumber SpecFlow will sit, it's like a wrapper, right? And it sits on top of your automation. So Cucumber is the framework. How it works is you will do your acceptance test in a given when-then scenario that feeds into this Cucumber framework, and then behind that is code, and that's what it's called. Your test cases are these feature files. The step definition is the code behind the test cases or the feature file. That code then calls any tool that you needed to call, whether it's Selenium, everybody typically uses. You've heard of Water or Fitness or Coded UI. And then you have a browser emulator or you don't, depending on if it's UI test or if it's a integration test, and then the results come back into it. And so the way Cucumber works is it's really just a wrapper that you can write your test cases or your acceptance tests in there, and then it basically allows, from a test automation perspective, to actually code the behaviors of that system behind that. Next slide, please. So the way that Cucumber works is, let's go back to my name example. Have 5 keywords. The 5 keywords are given, when, then, and but. I've been doing this for about 8 years. I honestly have a very hard time using the keyword but, so I'm not really going to go over it. But if we get it at a high level, given states a precondition, it takes you to the point where you're going to start the test. When and is the actions of that test, and then is what you're verifying. Okay? So if we go back to the original scenario, verify transactions around to the nearest cent, imagine if we had that acceptance criteria one step further with an example, which is, given I'm on the order screen, when I make a transaction of 9.025 and save the transaction, then the value should equal 9.02. Now imagine this. If you're in a Scrum team, you're in a backlog refinement or grooming session, and all of a sudden you see this example, you might say, I don't understand that. How is 9.02 the value? Why isn't it rounded up? And so the conversation, in my opinion, becomes a lot better when we take those acceptance criteria in the verify form and give that example. And that's really where BDD helps have better conversations. And so while me and Bob don't really disagree on this, but I often push him to say, we need more examples in our acceptance criteria, and this is where we disagree, because I think sometimes he thinks a few examples or a few of these given when then formats is enough, and I kind of say, it might sound like these are getting more into acceptance tests because we're getting so deep, but we got to make sure that at least the business logic is covered and that the team understands the examples of that. So let's go to the next slide, please. So this is an example of how I would have written this. So my feature would have been, user would like to have a successful presentation. Test that follow that would be, verify that the attendees stayed awake. Hopefully the 155 of you are awake and that they're happy with the presentation. And then here's some examples. Bob, go to the next slide real quick. So to transition that, right, this key to ATD is executable specifications. It drives the conversation, and other things first. Automation is a first level concern. Before we get to the debate, I want to take 2 minutes really quickly and kind of go over the process of how you could actually implement this in a way in an actual Scrum team. I think, again, this is where Bob and I, sometimes that's how we can get onto the debate, is around the process of implementing BDD and how it actually would work. And it really starts, and this is full circling it really starts when the product owner writes their acceptance criteria in that verify that bullet points. I push and coach that the product owner is taking additional steps, and they write out the given when then scenarios. And so and write as many given when then scenarios as needed to make sure the conversation fully explains the bulleted point acceptance criteria for there. From that point, if we are able to start there, if we actually have those good conversations and we build that acceptance criteria in that given when then format, imagine when we go to planning, we can actually, as a developer, look at that and say, you know what, based on these scenarios, I'm missing this function or this method or this action. It can help them plan better. It can actually help them break down their tasks into smaller chunks. When you get into the actual start of the sprint, you can actually, the developer will start coding and they can do test-driven development, TDD, because they have those scenarios immediately there. As the tester, I have 60 to 70% of my acceptance tests already defined for me if the product owner has already helped write those. I have to add the 30, 40%, but now I can immediately start automating along with a developer and avoid the many waterfalls that typically happen in sprints by the developer coding for 3 days, throwing it over the wall to the tester. Now the developer and the tester can work in parallel and do their coding and their testing throughout the story to a point where they actually can get done at the same time, and the conversations are getting better. And so, from a implementation perspective, those are some of the big benefits. If you can start the process by writing your acceptance criteria in that deeper format, then you can have better conversations, which builds the right thing first, which makes us more productive because we have less rework. We can automate and have a verification of doneness, and the story is completed in a more efficient manner. So that's my spiel, Bob. Onto the debate.
Well, I don't know, Mary, if there's a strong debate. I think folks are, very, very much you want to have a title that's catchy, and so we were trying to have a catchy title. I think as you were talking, I was taking notes, and I think the key difference between us, and I'd like to hear you react to it, is that I have an emphasis on conversation. And I put conversation, whether we're doing BDD, whether we're doing verify that. So Agile teams use user stories. User stories have the three C's: card, confirmation, and conversation. BDD, ATDD, acceptance test driven, behavior driven, whether you're using Gherkin language or whatever, you have to craft those acceptance criteria. Where we seem to sort of talk about is how many of them and how deep do we go, and then what is the boundary between conversation emphasis and coding emphasis. And that's at least was my notes. And then what I've seen in the real world, and you're not saying this, but I've seen some behavior in the real world where teams get BDD happy. You may not have seen this because you're such a good coach, where they get Gherkin happy. It's given when then, and then they immediately go to automating it. They immediately go to running it, and they forget to have those wonderful, rich conversations that you were alluding to. And I think that's the key for me. I want both sides, but I want to have those rich conversations sort of connecting us to the customer. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, having done this in 4 different implementations, you're right. I very rarely have had I've had one instance that happened exactly what you said, which was the product owner was an ex-tester who now is a BA, and she literally went through and wrote every possible scenario, every possible test case, every possible acceptance criteria. I mean, to the point where, you're right, the conversation in the room was less. And so that was the point where I had to pull back and say, okay, while we know we're going to build the exact right thing, we have lost the conversation. And so trying to coach her to say, okay, I know 20 acceptance criteria or 20 given one then is actually probably about the right number. And it my point to you in that case is maybe the story's too big. And so if it gets to the point where it's that big and that many scenarios, let's break it up, and then we can have better conversations around that. And so, she understood, she definitely agreed that it went from having really good conversations at the beginning when we started the BDD process to the point where now the team just would look at her feature files and be like, yeah, she's got it, that's it. You know, nobody actually started to have a brain and ask questions. And so it can happen, and that is a struggle, but you know, I like to get to that point and reel people back versus not having them start the process, because the biggest pushback that I get when I coach the product owners and organizations to transform is the product owners will tell me every time, this is more work for me. So I went from now a seven bulleted list and a user story that takes me 15 minutes to build to 30 minutes of writing a user story and writing the acceptance criteria and then doing the give and win then. And it's just too much time. I don't see the value in that. And you know, a lot of times I say, can you just try one and try to get them to do it? But what they find is that once they do try the one, that it does enhance the conversation so much better, that what they do is actually putting more work in up front, which causes less rework and less questions for them during the sprint and after it. So they start to see the value to put that time up front, to put a little bit more time and thought in that conversation and what how the system behaves, because it does in the end save them more time.
Right. I mean, you bring up another point that's on this slide. I remember when BDD first surfaced and acceptance tests, you know, there was fitness and acceptance test driven development, and then the behavior tools started surfacing, Cucumber, JBehave, and there was this promise at the time where, there was this thought in the Agile community where product owners would do all of this work up front, this wonderful magical work, which would lead to this notion of executable requirements, which would give the team all of this rich business information, and it would hand it to them. So, just like you described, I found the reality, though, is very few, and you alluded to this, very few product owners want to take that time or have that time. Even if they're passionate about it, sometimes they struggle with this. So very often the teams have to chip in on the BDD definitions. And so we've lost that promise, that great promise. Do you have any reactions to that? And it's not just a reality of laziness. I mean, and everyone has time limitations, so it's a matter of BDD in the real world. And how do you get BDD in the real world? The part that the PO plays and the part that the team plays. Reactions?
That's a struggle. That's a sales pitch. That's the how do you actually get BDD as part of the culture of how you work, right? And because I usually own the test organization, and maybe this is I sometimes say the backwards way of thinking things. The testers, my requirement is that all test cases are in this BDD, SpecFlow, or Cucumber format. And because of that kind of prerequisite, and then the amount of Three Amigo conversations that I require the testers to have with the developers and the product people around their test cases, then people start to see the real value of why don't we have this earlier, why don't we have this earlier, and pushing that upstream. And so if I can't get the product owners completely bought in at the beginning because of the amount of time it takes, things like that, it usually will work itself out because the tester will write their scenarios, the developer will be like, wow, this would have sure been nice to have before I started to code, and then through retrospectives and through just trying to convince the product owner of like this is the right thing to do, the product owners usually cave in whether they like it or not, and realize the value of creating these acceptance criteria in the give win format for the team. And so it's rare. I've never, to be honest, in my 4 or 5 times of implementing BDD across multiple companies, I've actually never had a product owner go back to just writing bullet points. Once I can get them and the Scrum team's bought in, it stays. But it's just initially getting the consistency to get it started.
Okay, I have one more question for you, but what I want to do before that is I want to encourage everyone who's listening in to ask questions. So we're looking at the question box, and I don't know if I see it. I may be filtered from it, but get your questions in there. We're going to have about 10 minutes for questions, or we're going to close it down. Mary, my final challenge to you, and I think it's another one of these rubs for it's not a debate rub, but it'll sound that way, is all of your experience is Marythorne driven. So by the sheer force of your experience and the sheer force of your will and your personality, you're making it happen. I've encountered places where there is no Marythorne to push the right thing happening. And so that's actually where I'm emphasizing what user stories. It's easier for organizations to do what I'm saying with user stories than to adopt BDD. So having a champion really helps. Having an informed coach really, really helps. Not every place has that. So there are these shades of gray where you can still be agile and maybe go get a coach or go get some training. But sometimes, emphasizing something where you don't have someone to really guide you in the balancing act is a real struggle. So I see a lot of failures because there's a lack of skill or a lack of test coaching. And you haven't seen that because you're in the place, you're actually implementing it yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay, that's fair. That's fair. I mean, there's a lot. So let's. How do you get around that? So if you're on this webinar and maybe that your test leaders or your product leader, maybe some teams don't have test leaders, some, or maybe your product organization is just moving into this or thinking about it, right? There's tons over the past 5 years. There's YouTube videos on behavior-driven development. Dan North, who really started this phenomenon, great website. And there's lots of education that you can do for yourself to help start to convince or influence or drive some of this. And so to Bob's point, it all starts with this user story. If you got a crappy user story, you're going to have crappy acceptance criteria, and then you're going to have a crappy output of a product. So at the end of the day, Bob is right. If it starts with the card, with the conversation, with the confirmation, get that right. But if you can add to that, add the examples, and add for a better conversation. It's one of those techniques, and I'll tell people this. Behavior-driven development is a way to take a typical, there's 4 stages of Agile: storming, forming, norming, and high performing. And it's a way to take just a typical, I'm a 30-point Scrum team, and I do 30 points very consistently every time. I'm never going to miss it. I'm never going to sandbag. We're 30 points team to actually able to increase their velocity because of the benefits around the examples and the conversations that happen. And so, again, lots of research on the internet. There's lots of good books starting to be written about it. Asla Kelsey wrote the Cucumber book. It's got some good stuff. He actually created Cucumber Limited and their consulting service now. Lots of different people that you can reach out to and educate yourself on how to get the benefits of this.
So cool. So I want to go to questions, but I have an admission. So it's not just Mary saying Bob's right. Actually, we both violently agree. It's a path. It's an evolution, and I'm going to go on record. BDD rocks. Given Women rocks. Conversations rock. So to Mary's point, figure out where you're at, emphasize the stories, and then embark on this path, everyone. So there really is no debate. It's these techniques work. It's just where you start, where you end, and what your vision is. And then do some research, go get some help, and then never ever forget the incrementalism of Agile. You don't have to boil the ocean. You just have to start, and you have to keep sort of hacking at it, and you'll make progress. So it's continuous improvement. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it back over and see if there's any questions. If not, we'll end this webinar. And I want to thank everyone for your attention and your time. We really appreciate it. Garg?
Hi, thank you very much, Bob and Mary, for your webinar there. Just before we look at those questions, I'm just going to talk through 1 or 2 slides before we get going. So let me just open up my screen here again. Now, tomorrow we have another webinar with Paul Gerard, who was a speaker at EuroSTAR last year, but he was also a program chair for EuroSTAR 2014 in Dublin, and his webinar is on digital transformation, testing and automation. That'll take place at 2 p.m. tomorrow. And finally, tomorrow as well is our call for submissions deadline. We've had loads and loads of submissions, and we're really delighted, and we just want to make sure that if you're not one of those people who've submitted, you still have time. If you visit the conference website there, you can submit, but there's also plenty of resources, various blog posts and things there that'll help you with your submission. Okay, let's have a look at some of the questions that are coming through here now. And first question I found here is it says, I work on a remote team and getting together to have the conversations is difficult. How do you keep the conversation going?
Mary?
Bob, why don't you start with that?
So, I mean, I think it comes back to this commitment. It starts with a story. So let's even come back. The distributed agile teams are a reality out there in the universe, and communication. So even forget BDD and ATDD. Just talk about conversation around the story. You have to commit as a team to all of the collaboration bits that Scrum and Kanban and Agile methods want. You don't necessarily have to be face to face, but there's so many tools nowadays. But you have to commit to working as a team. You have to commit. Let's use the Three Amigos. That model, that thinking tool. You have to commit to Three Amigos working together to build the code. No matter how many time zones you're separated, I need the team to commit to collaboration, to commit to conversation. And I really need the product owner and the developers and the testers to do that. Is it harder when you're distributed? Absolutely. But that's the model. That's the model, whether you're doing, whether you're focusing on the automation or not. Now, once you start having those conversations, then it leads into some of the BDD conversations, which adds to the depth and breadth of those conversations. So my advice is, sort of bite the bullet, drink your Agile Kool-Aid as a team. Remember that collaboration is sort of one of the bedrock attributes of a good Agile team. And then around the user stories, I know it's harder, but don't make excuses. Really figure out a way as a team to get involved in those stories. Backlog refinement is one of those meetings in Scrum. Really engage in those backlog refinement meetings. If you're not being included for some reason, make sure that you have a seat at the table. It's a team activity. It's not a tech lead activity. So if you're being marginalized in some way, get yourself a seat at that table as an amigo and get in the game.
All right, let's have a look at another question here. This question says, in my experience, business owners should never be allowed to write testable specs alone. They lack the skills to write the most concise set of accurate tests without development test. Do you agree?
Oh, Mary, this one has you written all over it.
I don't agree, actually. But again, the acceptance criteria to what Bob says is that it's confirmation of what the story is supposed to do, not the how. And you know what, there is going to be business logic in that, and I'm okay with the product owner and the having conversations with the developers and testers and writing acceptance criteria around what if scenarios. What if what's the unhappy path? What if you put this value in or you don't enter a required field? What kind of error message are you supposed to receive? That could be technically a test, right? So people say, why does the product owner need to put anything around the unhappy path or negative testing? Well, because the happy path doesn't always happen, and so a lot of times they'll enter in acceptance criteria that could be, and most of the time is a test case to make sure that we're covering how the system's supposed to work in normal conditions and not normal conditions, and non-functional non-functional way as well. So my opinion, I think that I'm not saying they're writing the test cases. I'm saying that they are contributing to them. Bob, what's your thoughts on that?
I have a simpler reaction. I think the questioner misinterpreted, or we did a poor job of communicating. In an Agile team, no one ever goes it alone. The Amigos rule. So if you have folks who are going it alone, then raise your hand and stop that. It's a collaborative model. Those conversations happen around the story. So someone may go it alone for a few minutes, that's fair game. Someone may initiate a story at their desktop and do it alone, but then it gets vetted with the team. So that concern in a healthy Agile team should go away. We developed this software together.
Okay. We're almost out of time, so we'll just take maybe 3 more questions as we we kind of got a little delayed getting started. So the first question I have here of those three is how hard is it to have an agile team implement BDD and ATDD when they have already been working for a period of time without BDD?
So that's a good question. Go ahead, Bob.
No, you got it, Mary.
So everywhere I've actually came into from an organization leadership perspective, some have had decent automation, whether it be like fitness, which doesn't have specflow on top of it, or they've used some type of code URL, code UI, ALM, some type of automation framework. And when I come in and it's around how do we take what we have, is it the best tools for our job, and how do we take it to the next level? And what I typically do is do tool bake-offs of here's our acceptance criteria of what we really need our automation to do, what are the benefits of the things that we have out there, and do tool shootouts to see is this the right tool for us going forward. And so when that happens, the way I've usually transitioned it is, we leave the old automation up and running, but then we just move it into that behavior-driven model. So it's a transition. Like this sprint, I'll automate this new feature and this new in the new framework that's BDD supported, and then we'll turn off the old feature until we get to a point where it's all BDD based. Bob?
I would just simply add, and I'm triggering off of you have an existing Agile team and you haven't tried these new techniques. One of the wonderful things that Agile teams should be doing continuously is experimentation. So in your next retrospective, bring these techniques up. Invite folks to listen to this webinar or to look at something else, and don't shove BDD down everyone's throat. Don't look at it as a global program. Actually, introduce it as an experiment. Maybe take 2 or 3 stories out of your next 2 or 3 sprints, and say, can we run an experiment? Can we try this technique and see if it makes so if the outcomes are better, then it's working. If it doesn't generate value and doesn't generate, better team play, better quality, better value, better customer value, more delighted customers, well, then it's not worth it. So run those experiments. Try it. Just try it on a story.
Okay, let's have a look at another question here, which says, we work in an environment where enforcing a development method on multiple development teams is near impossible. Therefore, I am considering taking aspects of both approaches for different areas of testing. Would you agree with this approach?
I think my last answer really complemented that. I think we've lost, in many organizations that have gone Agile, we've lost the boldness of learning. We've lost the boldness of experimentation. Now, there's risks associated with that. There's risks of success, and then there's risks of failure, but little mini failures. But out of failure comes more learning. I'm not in your environment, but I would recommend, trying different things across multiple teams, seeing what works, and then trying to converge that maybe organizationally, finding things that really have value for your organization, and then sort of aggregating them or converging them as not best practices, but good practices in your context. I would willingly, you have my vote for trying some things out, with some guidance and seeing what happens, and really trusting the teams, letting the teams go, and I think the teams will figure out what's working for them. And when I say the teams, I'm including product owner and business in that, right? So there's a natural. It's not just developers. It's not just testers. So it's the Three Amigos. If there's something that I hope that we leave with everyone who's listening, Three Amigo mindset in everything we do will do no harm for you all. Darg, I think that might be the last question that we take. Would you mind? I think we're at the time, right?
Yeah, that's perfect. Let's wrap it up there. I'd like to thank Bob and Mary for taking time out for today's webinar, and thanks to all of our attendees as well. And I'm just going to send you all a link here. And in this link, you can access a previous webinar that Bob and Mary have done for us there, entitled The Three Pillars Approach to Agile Testing Strategy. It was very popular. And on that page too, you'll find a link that'll bring you through to an ebook that Bob and Mary have created for us too, called The Three Pillars of Agile and Quality Testing. So that's it from us for today, and we hope to see you all again tomorrow. Cheers again, Bob and Mary.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye now.